So in the West, there's this strange phenomenon surrounding immigration. So regardless of where you fall on the economic, social, ideological divide in the Western world, it's basically an undisputed fact that immigration is incredibly bad overall. It's bad for trust, it's bad for civic order, it's bad for crime, and in the long term, it's actually bad economically. There's some debate over that, but there are moral issues with how we even measure economic development. But sidestepping all of these, there's another issue that I really want to talk about today, which is why is it, and it's accepted, it's almost a sociological truism in the West, that being anti-immigration is low status and being pro-migration is high status. And all the points that I mentioned before, this falls into the trap of arguing rationally. But of course, humans are not rational. There's no part of us really that is rational. Even when we think rationally and devise rationally, we're still held captive by some kind of worldview that's underpinned by a greater form of philosophy, which comes down to things that are beyond that, which can be empirically measured. But regardless of this, why has it come this way? Why has it crumbled this way? Well, I want to talk about a dinner party I went to and some conversations I had. So without giving too much away, everyone was very high status at this dinner party, and everyone was ideologically left-wing. And the topic of immigration came up, or to describe it more accurately, the topic of state-sanctioned human trafficking. That's really what it is deep down. And something occurred to me, something clicked. Why is it that these people who, are so removed from the real on-the-ground effects of migration are so for it? And then I realized there's something below the rationale going on, something subconscious. It occurred to me that the reason that it is high status to be pro-state-sanctioned human trafficking is because you are signaling subconsciously. I don't think anyone at this dinner party was doing it subconsciously, although they weren't doing it consciously, but I'll get on to something a little bit later about that. But what you're doing is you're basically saying, I have so much money and I live in such a good part of town that I don't actually need to worry about my daughters being predated by criminal gangs from the third world. My job is of such high status, it's so secure, it requires me to be qualified to a degree that I'm not actually worried about the complete devastation to manufacturing in the West, even to service jobs in the West from the government-sanctioned human trafficking and third world poaching of human capital that sustains Western economies. I'm so high status that those aren't even issues to me. So although it may seem like morally repulsive to be flexing, right, on your own countrymen, on the working class, on the poor, that, why would leftists be doing this? Why would, liberals be doing this? But that is the point. They're not really leftists. They're not authentic leftists. They don't really have that much in common with Stalin or Pol Pot or Mao. You can think what you like of those people. They're kind of these demons of history. They're great men. But they're something. They're leftists. And they believed something that these, people around a dinner party don't believe. They believed in something. And these people, and I say it's subconscious, they're signaling, my daughter will never be raped by Pakistani rape gangs because I live in a nice area. So being pro-migration becomes a kind of accessory of status in that way. It's dark to think of it that way. And some of them are just completely, naive or politically ignorant. But it's not always the case, and in fact in lots of cases it isn't. These rape gangs, the economic issues, the other stuff, it's glaringly obvious. I mean, these are national scandals. These are all over the newspapers. They are everywhere, and people act like it didn't happen. I used to live in a European country, and during this time, I don't know what I can say on YouTube, but there was the planned mass rapes that happened. You know, you can hear girls screaming across the city, right? And the police are standing in between, you know, these distraught indigenous locals and all of these people that have just arrived there. And it's literally a coordinated attack. It's over every newspaper. It's everywhere. And there's hundreds, maybe thousands across Europe of victims of it. Everyone knows or knows someone who was a victim of these sex attacks. And yet everyone acts like it didn't happen. This goes some way to showing just how the real cause of the problem, you know, isn't necessarily these third world gangs. The real problem isn't necessarily even Islam, you know, being as it is a medieval religion. The real problem is our own individualism. It's the way that we look at our countrymen and turn our backs on them. And the way that we destroy the moral framework that would stand in between us and this pure kind of luxury politics, this pure accessory politics, this subconscious, semi-conscious drive to signify your own worth. And that occurred to me. I was looking around at these people and just thinking, wow, how morally repulsive it is. But that's what it is. It is just pure status. And this gets me on to another point. So I was in an elite educational institution, right? Yeah, one of the most elite in Britain. And I was talking to some professor, and we were talking just generally, like, he was a very open-minded, you know, we'd wax about everything, you know, prided himself on being very cultured. We talk about philosophy, all kinds of ideas in the arts, and it came on to football, right? And we were talking about how high culture, when it certain of these archetypal ideals, when they're excommunicated from high culture, when they cannot be integrated, end up emerging in very, very low culture. Thinking of like the Superman appearing in comic books, which now they're mainstream, but they were trash for children. For years and years, they were absolute trash for children that would be destroyed, you know, the next week after they were sold, basically. They were pulp. You can think of that, like this almost fascistic ideal of the Superman entering comic books. You can think of also reality TV. You have all of the kind of themes in it of, you know, betrayal, incest, tragedy, right? All these concepts which would have been in Greek dramas and Greek plays, and which unearth really nasty, deep, dark parts of the human being that cannot be integrated into liberal individualism, this sanitized view of the human being. So it emerges in low culture, where no one pays any attention, where no one's really that interested in it. Or they can just dismiss it as stupid poor people. So that's another element of it, like the denial of what we are as humans and our dark side of it. But when I was talking to this professor, a topic came up about how, like, tribalism, and I didn't say it, but it's implied, tribalism, racialism, nationalism, these forms of kind of, tribalistic masculine bonding and aggression are taken up by football teams. And the football teams become a kind of, you know, as corporatized as they are, as soulless as they are, they become these emblems for this old, almost pagan kind of ethnicism, tribalism in it, that is pushed out from liberal society, and it becomes an outlet like that. And the moment I said this, the professor just shrieks in horror, He recoiled, almost like a priest making the sign of the cross. He was just repulsed by me, repulsed by that idea in that moment, and was like, no, it's just an excuse for shitty people to be shitty. And I was thinking, really? Does that explain the relationship that masculinity has to football culture? Does that explain, the firms, the companies, the troops, the tribes associated with football teams, and the, communality that it has with it, the relationship between nationalism and organized sports? And he's like, no, they're just bad people. They're just shitty, nasty bullies and bad people, and that's why they act the way they do. That's why this sort of pagan tribalism, emerges, because they're like, individually they have failed morally. And it was just an end to the conversation. And in it, I could tell, you look at someone's face, you can just tell they have contempt. I could tell he just had contempt for poor white football fans who'd been denied their ethnicism, so had found it in this degraded, commercialized form of low culture, football culture. And yeah, he was just repulsed by that even suggestion that there was something more deep going on. So a lot of these people, like the people around the dinner table, it's not just that they are denying what it is, dark sides of human nature, and it's not just that they necessarily are naive as well. It's that they have a real contempt for members of their own ethnicity who are poor and who are vulnerable and who are actually being victimized by state-sanctioned, mass human trafficking and exploitation. It's the poor whites who are liquidated with the third world, and who are betrayed by middle-class and upper-class whites in doing so. And it's just contempt. They just look at them and are disgusted by them, and they see them as on the out. So it's those three things. It's a denial of the dark sides of our human nature. It's signifying just pure status. I'm so protected that none of the negative sides of migration would affect me. All migration means to me is I have cheap nannies and spicy food, and all my brown friends went to Cambridge and Oxford. Or I hang out with rich Saudis who I manage their money for them. That's their version of diversity. They're not being predated by criminal gangs. And it's also a real nasty class contempt. Literal contempt for the poor and for the vulnerable. Contempt for those who you step on and who your ancestors stepped on to gain their wealth, their property, their status. And that's a deep part of English society and our class system, going way back to the kind of mercantile revolution that happened around the Reformation and Enlightenment. A really dark part of what we are. But yeah, that's it. Why is signifying your pro-migration high status? For those three reasons. All right, I'll catch you in the next one.